Hello everybody, my name is Alan, I'm from Sauber-Lab, and today will be another video where I show a little bit more about Nextcloud and OpenMediaVault. And you're gonna ask, Alan, you already show a lot of videos about Nextcloud and a lot of videos about OpenMediaVault. And I will answer you, yes, it's true, I show a lot of videos, but today it's important to tell that Nextcloud is a really good tool, work really well, starts to be more stable, and you can use for different applications. And this application that I will show you is how you can configure the WebDav. Not only configure it, we're gonna show how you can configure the external access using the DockDNS. I will show how you can configure it in the way that you don't need to have the install Nextcloud, or at least you don't need to install Nextcloud on your computer. You don't need to access by web browser. You can configure it in such a way that is really easy to access and that work really well, and that it's light speed and will work any computer, either that you don't have the admin right. So if you like this idea and want to learn a little bit more about it, we're gonna show you this video. But first of all, don't forget to leave your like, consider to subscribe for the channel, and let's see how we can do it. Okay, first thing, we go to the basics. The operating system that I use, it's OpenMediaVault, so let's look in on it. If you look, I have 51% of utilization of my CPU. In this CPU, because I have only one core or two cores, I'm not sure now, they use quite a lot of my CPU, depending which application. Also, I have only 5 GB of RAM memory, and I have 10 GB of full capacity. The service that is currently running, it's Docker, FTP, SMB, and SSH. And if I look here, they are running the option OMV6. When I say that's 10 GB of storage, if I come here in storage, and my disks, I have basically two disks. The first one is running the US, and the second one is the data. I didn't do any RAID because it's only a virtual machine, so it doesn't matter it. If I come here in RAID, it's totally zero, and my smart will not show anything because it's a virtual machine and they will show as a no. They don't access whole my hard drive or whole my SSD, they only access partial it, so they will say a no. Other thing that it's important to see, it's in my share folder. I have one share folder called home. Also, before we do any configuration, anything, we need to look for my user and look that I have a user Sauber-Lab and my Sauber-Lab FTP. This one I use my last video when I create my FTP connection. But this Sauber-Lab, I don't remember it had or not, but this one that will be responsible for this user, basically to do all the application. Have this one in mind. Other thing that we need to have, if I come here in system, OpenMediaVault extra, here I need to have the Docker install and Portainer install. Yacht is not necessary, but both applications required. If you don't have OpenMediaVault extra installed in your system, you always can come here and search online OpenMediaVault extra. And once that appears this page, you can open the SSH and only copy this link or this code and run it, and done. Everything is installed. They will update your system, we will do the installation, and after this one, you can only install Docker and Portainer. Why Portainer? Because Portainer is really easy to use. Now I have my Portainer here and I have some application installed. And if I come here my stock, I have my Nextcloud that it's running against of these steps. Nextcloud, basically I use the Linux server Nextcloud. So if I come here, the image that I install, it's Nextcloud Linux server. Here it's interesting to look because it's have architecture for almost all the kind of CPU. They work with 86, 64 bits, ARMs, and that's if I go down, the way that I install is the Docker Compose because basically it's the easiest one. When I do the installation for the Docker Compose, I basically copy this one and I make some modification. But before we look with modification that I did, it's important to understand what parameters that this container will ask you. So first thing is the port 443. In my case, I changed for 444 because I didn't want to have conflict with any other application, and 443 could be used for any HTTPS protocol and gonna be used in the proxy manager, so it's better to change and will not affect anything. PUID, PJD will be the PUID or PJD for the user. Time zone is where you locate. As I'm here in England, so I can put Europe, London. I have to create two folders. The first one will be the configuration, the name I already tell, where we're gonna save all the configuration, and the next one will be the data, where the name tell will be the data. If you don't want to keep in this specific location, you want to keep in another place, we always can move this data for another place. But in this start, we're gonna leave in the data place. So have this one in mind. Now I did the configuration. What I changed? I changed my PUID, my PJD to be accordingly, and I use the volumes. The volumes that I create, I use the Open Media Val. If I come here in my storage, share folder, I use exactly the same. If you look and compare, it will be exactly the same. Also, I create a folder called Nextcloud, and inside this one I create a folder called config because I want to do all the configuration. Next folder that I create, it's the data, where we'll save all the data, and I change the port 444 as I told you, and that I put deploy the stack. In this case, I already done the stack. The next step that I need to do is to create the database. I use the Maria database because it's good and lightweight. So I use this image, Linux Server MariaDB. It's from Linux Server and have over 100 million downloads, and it has been updated 7 hours ago. So if I come here, they have exactly the same kind of architecture that you can use with 86 and 64, also ARM system. If I go here, what I use is this Docker Compose. This Docker Compose is interesting to look because you don't need to open the database to do a database. You do all the configuration straight away. So let's go into parameters and try to understand what they do. First thing, the port 336. You don't need to leave 336, you can put any port that you want. Also, we're gonna have the PUID PJD because we want to have rights to write and read in the system. My root password could be any password, and it's important you to set a strong password, otherwise someone that have access for your network can look for this database and mess up or do whatever they want. Next step is the time zone, exactly the same as the Nextcloud. Our database name, our user and password. Here in Remote SQL, it's not required only if you want to have injection externally for another system. In our case, we are running all this Nextcloud local, and that only the web page or the user access will be external, so we'll be totally fine to remove this information. And for last will be configuration. So if I come here in my portainer and open my DB, let's go in stock, Nextcloud DB, editor. So I did exactly the same that I told. I put the PUID PJD, the password I put password because it's only local run, so it doesn't matter so much. Time zone I leave exactly the same. Database I put as a Nextcloud, user Sauber-Lab, and the password. I did in a similar volume, so I use exactly the start of the absolute path plus Nextcloud, and that database where I want to save this database. And the port I leave exactly the same. Potentially I could change my port, but I didn't see necessity, so I leave exactly the same. So after this one, I update the stock. Why we don't stop in this way? You want to install the DockDNS, and why we want to install the Proxy Manager. As well, I want to understand a little bit more about the system. So if I come back in stock and open my Nextcloud, here's my Nextcloud install with the local IP address. It will be 192.168.7.444. One thing that's interesting for this Nextcloud that the red come with WebDav install. So if I come here in File and put Settings, the red have this option for WebDav that you can configure and access it. But we can access this WebDav in this way. We're gonna check it, but first of all, those applications exactly the same that come from our original system. Other thing, before we install this, before we configure this WebDav, it's interesting always, it's coming here in your application or apps, and look which kind of apps that you have. And remember, Nextcloud, it's always offering different updates, and that you have a lots of different applications that you can install. If you look all the application that you had 2 years ago, it's much larger now than before. So you can have Active Shared for downloads, you can have some PN that they're testing, automate PDF convert, home automation, and others that you can have. Either you can have a raw file open And why is interesting Nextcloud? Because Nextcloud, it's not only application that you can use only for shared data, but as well they have a lots of different applications or different options. You can install the Nextcloud and configure it to automatically update or backup of your data. So in this way you don't need to have any special thing to do the backup. Basically you can open your application in your phone and that they will do automatically backup and organize automatically according to your needs. So it's quite interesting option that you have, and always have more and more options and more applications that they are testing or they are trying to test, or either open source that people is trying to put the application to see if it's work or not. So let's return here in our file, because I go to out this time, and I come here and copy this WebDav. So if I open my computer and I put add a network location and next local, and I copy this one and try to put next, then they will open this page that I need to select what kind of certification that I want. Basically why this happen, if you look here they have HTTPS protocol and they start with HTTPS. So as a standard Windows try to locate certification. You have two of those. If I try to select the second, let's see, and put OK, the red appear that don't have a valid certification. Because once that you do this configuration here, you don't have a properly certification, and they are looking for a certification because they are looking for HTTPS protocol. Either that you're using any kind of VPN, you're not going to be able to access in this way. Then come the idea, let's configure the DockDNS to have external access, Proxy Manager to generate your SSL certification, and in this way you can try to reconfigure it. So let's cancel it for now. And let's come back in our web page. Here in our web page, what we need to do. Now we're gonna use the DockDNS. So if I open the DockDNS, I can look in and use this image, Linux server DockDNS, where I can configure it. So let's go back here and see what kind of platform that they work, or what kind of architecture that will work, and work exactly the same, 86, 64, ARM and ARM. So we're gonna use the Docker Compose, but before we copy the Docker Compose and configure it, we need to understand what kind of configuration that we need to do, or what information that we don't need at all. So if I come here in parameters, I have my PUID and PGID, that in the case I will need to modify it. Time zone will be where you're located, and here my subdomains. My subdomains will be all the subdomains that you create. The DockDNS for free allowed you to create 5 subdomains. In this case, you can put all your 5 to locate in the same machine, or you can get for different machines. Here your token that you can find in your DockDNS, and that's the log file that you can leave as a false because I don't want to log any information. If you put true, you need to map configuration, but in our case we're gonna leave false because we'll not add any value for it. So it's totally fine to remove configuration. It's totally fine to remove. So after I do this one, we need to install the Proxy Manager. I come here in my container, and here is my Proxy Manager. The Proxy Manager works in 2 ways. If you come here in our page for Proxy Manager, they already change a little bit. If you only do this configuration, they will not have the database configured, so you need to do it manually. To avoid it, we're gonna use one of the old configuration that I have. I will put the link in the description, don't worry about it. And that this one is revision 3, where I have my image name, that is Proxy Manager, all the ports that we'll have. In this case, I configured port 90 because the 80 is already using for my Open Media Val, and I don't want to have any conflict. My port 81 that will access my application, and the port 450 where will directly for the protocol for free to have the HTTPS protocol. And here I configure my environmental. My first environment will be for my Proxy Manager, and the second environmental or second configuration will be the database. In this case I'm using Maria database because I really like it, but you can use any kind of database that you want. Once that I have this configuration, don't worry, I will put in the description that you can only copy it. We can have access for my Proxy Manager. So in this way, I come here in my container and create my Proxy Manager. One thing that's interesting, if you create in this way for container, there will appear 2 containers. The first containers will be the database, and the second one will be the app. all those databases relate from only one Docker Compose or one stack that you create. And it's quite interesting because if you manage modifying each one, will work different ways, and that you don't need to map properly any port. Once that you have the configuration and work the app quite well, first thing that I create, it's Sauber-Lab, and after this one, I come here in my dashboard, Proxy, and I already create my user Sauber-Lab 1.DockDNS. I create with SSL from Let's Encrypt. So if I come here, this is the SSL and it has been created today, basically. So if I come in my server and I come here in my Nextcloud configuration, www Nextcloud and configuration, I have this file called config.php. If I come here and put edit, I already modify it. So basically I modify from 0 to I have access for the Sauber-Lab.DockDNS, and the second one will be the IP address if I want to access local. Normally it's advised only to leave one of those, but I want to leave both, so it's totally fine. Other thing, all the rest of the configuration I leave exactly the same because I don't need it to change. But if you have a reason to change anything else, you can change, principally if you have the database change, but I suggest only to change this trust domain. And now I can access my Nextcloud using external website. So here it's already external, and if I look, it's already HTTPS. So if I come here, certification is valid, you already appear my issue to Sauber-Lab, and that's when it's date, when it's expired. If I come certification, if I look here and go back, they come from the ESRG, because Let's Encrypt generated this certification, and in details I can have all my information, what's kind of connection, what's the private key, public key, and everything. So I have this one in mind. I come here in my files exactly the same way that I did before, settings, and I copy this WebDav. Now they have a valid certification, so shouldn't be any issue as before happened. So I come here and I come for this PC and try to do exactly the same procedure. Add network, next, come here and I paste this information and I put next. Now that you have a valid SSL, they already allowed you to connect. If you already had a password before, it will not ask again because I already did it before with exactly the same website. They didn't ask my password. So now I can access it. If I double click here, I have exactly the same files that I have here. And if I come here and delete one file, they should delete in a couple of seconds this one as well. So if I come here and refresh this page, they shouldn't have this information. What's the difference for the FTP and exactly this application, or the Nextcloud use the WebDav? It's simple. If I open here again, I can come here and open any application and they will run it in the way that you can just run it. If you're using the FTP, you cannot open an application or run it. Of course, all the time that you try to open it, they will ask you the password, and if you don't put remember my credential, they will not allow you to access. But at least you know that you can access anywhere and you can only open as a normal file, and it will be a little bit slow depending what kind of internet you have, but you don't need to download. You can only open it and that is open. You can search the pages, you can look what the information that I have, and they will only work without any issue. So it's the important. Also, remember that I deleted that previous file here. If I come here back in my application, delete it, I can always come here and restart. In this way, if I delete any information by mistake, I can recover the information. Different for the FTP, that if I delete any information, it's gone. It's really difficult. Unless you have a snapshot, unless you do a backup, you cannot recover it. At least it's not perfectly, but you still have a little bit more chance to recover your data. You can always add a different application to do backup, different application to do a snapshot, different application to do different things. So guys, I know that you're gonna ask why I go through all this procedure. I want to show in the last minute how you can do the configuration. It's easy. If I show how to do the configuration with the WebDav without have a properly SSL certification, this will not work the same way that I showed before. They will have request the certification, you're gonna put OK, but because you don't create or don't add a certification to this Nextcloud, they will not allow you to access. Just a protection or extra protection. Also, you need to have a certification add. You can use directly download certification, but my way, or at least I prefer to use the proxy manager to do it. So if you like this video and think that was interesting, don't forget to leave your like, consider to subscribe for the channel, and see you next time. Bye.